Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mastermind in Tactical Strategy Games panel with me, Andy Griffiths from the Renaissance PR team, and Peaky Blinders, Mastermind, Space Crew and Partisans 1941. Today, we've got with us Anton Martyshenko, creative lead for Partisans 1941, Sandy Lockie, designer for Peaky Blinders, Mastermind, and Dave Miller, Runner Duck co-founder and art lead on Space Crew and Bomber Crew. So we'll allow the guys to take you through their games in a second with some trailers. But first of all, I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of what this panel is. So essentially, like I said, I've been a fan of strategy games my whole life. So this panel is all about taking a look at where strategy games are at the moment, taking a look at the different approaches to strategy games that people can take, from utilizing licensed properties to historically accurate properties to completely new sci-fi universes. So hopefully by the end of this panel you have a few insights in what it takes to create these games, but also a few an idea of where this genre is going and why it's having a bit of a moment at the moment. So first up, we've got Anton Martyshenko from Russia, who's dialed in, which is absolutely fantastic. So Anton, would you like to introduce Partisans 1941 to us and just say hello?
Sure. Partisans 1941 is a real-time tactical strategy with stealth elements. It's set on the Eastern Front during the Second World War, and you play the leader of a squad of Soviet-Russian resistance guerrilla fighters and actually fight against Nazi German occupational forces. So this part of the resistance movement and the story of resistance movement in Russia is not well known, especially in the West during the Second World War, and this is something we would like to tell about our players.
Awesome stuff. So we got a trailer for that game just coming up now. Great stuff. Definitely picking up a little bit of a Commandos vibe from that one. So now we'll pass on to Sandy Lockie, designer for Peaky Blinders Mastermind. Sandy, do you want to introduce your game for a bit?
Yeah, so Peaky Blinders Mastermind is set just after the war. So it's when the Peaky Blinders boys have returned back to Small Heath. And they're kind of encountering this power vacuum there because all the sort of young men were away fighting. And so it kind of deals with them trying to establish their foothold back in Small Heath. And the thing that we really focused on was, it's a quote from season 1 where Tommy Shelby's talking about the soldier's minute and how he manipulates the environment, his allies and his enemies, so that during that 1 minute, everything comes together to help him sort of overcome these insurmountable odds. And so that's what mechanically we let players do by rewinding time and layering over the characters' abilities and getting them into the right positions. We let people orchestrate that one perfect soldier's minute.
Peggy 16.
My brother, he sees the job in his head. He's worked it over and over again. 1,000 times. And it don't matter who stands in our way. Tommy has a plan. And every one of us Shelbys, we stand ready. but we stand ready to do what he demands. To play our part, to get it done. By order of the Peaky Blinders. Peaky Blinders Mastermind available now.
Great stuff. Now that brings us right on to Space Crew. So, Dave, would you like to introduce us to Space Crew?
Sure. So Space Crew is a tactical crew management game where you recruit a crew, put them on a spaceship, and send them out on missions in order to defend the Earth from an alien invasion. On these missions, you have to manage your crew and the stations on the ship. So there's many stations. There's like security station that deals with shields. There's a comm station that can call in friendly fighters to come and support you. There's also an engineering station where you can manage the power from your reactor. And the reactor powers multiple systems on the ship, such as the shield generators, the gravity generator, and the oxygen generator, which is especially important. And you basically just have to manage the damage to your ship, keep them alive, complete the mission, get them home safely.
Captain's log. Earth date, I lose track. Today was supposed to be simple. In and out. Duck soup, as my great-great-great-great-grandfather used to say, in his war. We'd encountered more Phasmid ships than we were expecting, so I jumped straight on the guns like the hero I am. Seeing an empty captain's chair, our only engineer decided to take control of the ship. With the donut doing donuts in the USS Donut, our weapons guy of all people was left trying to fix the damage we were taking. Lacking security, the Phasmids boarded. With fire and Phasmids abound, Leonard made the ever-so-logical decision to purge the ship, ejecting most of the Phasmids, but also himself. It was time to think carefully about this. I directed my crew with my superior knowledge of their strengths. Engineer, go fix. Gunners, on the guns. Security, secure the ship. Comms, Captain, smolder. Oh, frack, I thought. Captain, evasive maneuvers. Captain, prime escape pods. Captain, pick your battles. Captain, pick harder. I still don't know how we got out of that alive. Well, I say we. I guess it's time to sort out a new ship and recruit the next generation.
Okay, Dave, that looks great. Obviously, Space Crew is the sequel to Bomber Crew, right? So can you give us some idea of, and can you take us back to the original Bomber Crew a bit and talk about how that was the inspiration and why you guys decided to take it into space?
Well, Bomber Crew actually came from just the concept of managing the crew of a bomber, and we didn't necessarily set out to make a strategy game. But it just so happened with the multiple units, that was the best way to go, because there was no way to do direct control, especially because the focus of the game is on the stories and the fates of the characters, and so they have to be kind of independent. It's kind of a God game in a way. So we don't really let you directly control them. We just, you sort of just give them orders. But I have always been a fan of strategy games. My first memory of a strategy game was Laser Squad on the Spectrum back in 1988, which was kind of a precursor to XCOM and UFO, Enemy Unknown, and all that. And that was great fun because it was local multiplayer. So I'd play it with my siblings on a Saturday afternoon, and one of us would take a turn while the other one had to stand behind the TV and not see what the other player was doing. So yeah, I've always had a soft spot for strategy games like that.
That actually brings me nicely on to the next question, really, which was what are the strategy games that kind of inspired you guys to create what you created, and what are your personal favorites? Like mine, I think I wasn't really much of a strategy gamer until I played Commandos when I was I think I must have been about 13 or something, on a demo disc that I got with PC Gamer back in the day. And I remember like replaying those first two missions like absolutely regularly, back to back, all the time, just trying to figure out how the different scenarios really worked. So Anton, obviously your game is it's a little bit inspired by Partisans 1941. Is it a little bit inspired by Commando? So maybe you can talk a little bit about, maybe your favorite games.
Yeah, actually, like with many other with many other people here, the first game actually I played was Civilization. So it was like 1992. It's like there were no game consoles in Russia, and the only thing you can get was actually a PC. And that was the first game I was playing when I was a kid. I wasn't particularly successful because I was quite small at this time in during the course of the game, but I loved it a lot and played endlessly in cycles. And then when I actually joined the game industry, one of the games which influenced this choice was the game called Silent Storm, which was developed by Russian developer called Nival. And actually, after playing and enjoying this game so much, I decided to join this company, which I managed to do. And after that, the first game I actually worked on myself was Heroes of Might and Magic, which is not a tactical game generally, although it has tactical part to it, a strategic game. But anyway, it's like a lot of in my life as a developer was linked and connected to strategic and tactical games. And also with regards to Partisans game, there were some other influences which are great tactical games. Obviously, one of them is Man of War game, which is brilliant game and very complex and very systematic game. And another one is obviously Commando game, which has a direct influence on what we are developing now. So I have to say that it's more of a stealth puzzle game rather than a tactical game. But when I was a kid and I was playing it, I did not distinguish these two things. It was just a great tactical experience for me.
I think that's a really important point, Anton. Like it doesn't really matter what the label of the game is. I think ultimately it's whether you call it God game, strategy game, real-time strategy game, tactical strategy, or whatever. It still plays into that you being this far away figure manipulating people either directly or manipulating the area around the people in order to conjure up the scenario that you want. I mean, Sandy, that kind of describes Peaky Blinders Mastermind a little bit as well. Like, I mean, in terms of tactical strategy, do you have any like favorite games, or what were like your early experiences with the subgenre?
In God game wise, I guess so. We played a lot of Command and Conquer and did a lot of lugging our PCs over to each other's house to play LAN parties with Command and Conquer. And in terms of God game, like I used to sort of just have a set goal for myself, which wasn't necessarily to win the battle, and was often counters to that. So like in playing Red Alert, just trying to get a bear army, the biggest bear army I could, and go rampaging into an opponent's base, just for the look on their face as like 40, 50 bears come luzzing in there, completely ineffective because they can't destroy buildings, so they just sort of sit around scratching themselves for a while and then potter off again. But yeah, that ability to kind of express yourself and do what you want in these kind of games is always really empowering. But yeah, like going back to strategy games growing up, like I had I think I was saying similar to Antoine, like I had Civilization on my Mac, didn't really understand it, used to click things around, they moved around, sometimes things got bigger, sometimes things died, but it seemed fun. But yeah, I think the first one that really got its hooks into me was Advance Wars. Playing that on the old Game Boy, like hunched over for hours at a time. And then more recently into things like Slay the Spire and Into the Breach, that just once you play them for like half an hour, they really get their hooks into you. And I have great fun like recommending those to my brother as well, because he's like, no, not interested. And then I'll get a message like 2 weeks later going, what have you done to me? Like, I can stop playing this. They are, when you see everything kind of open up and you see all the abilities that you can do and the way that they can mesh together, there's something really kind of intoxicating about that.
I think this is one of the reasons why they're doing so well recently, because you can play them in so many different ways. That works fantastically for your game on Twitch and on YouTube, because you can watch like The Last of Us on YouTube and you can kind of get the whole story from someone playing through it. Whereas with a strategy game, if you watch someone play it, you always think, oh, I'd do that differently, or I'd try this. And so there's a reason to go and buy the game rather than just watch it, because you can do better or you can do it differently.
Dave, I think that's a really good thing that you just touched upon there, which is the challenges of developing systems and developing scenarios where players can ultimately choose their own path or choose their own approach or choose how they want to solve it. Obviously, what do you think are the challenges of focusing on building scenarios that can be solved multiple different ways using multiple different approaches? Because basically what you're talking about is sandbox development versus linear story-based development, right? I mean, how do you do that?
I think making a strategy game that's based on systems, I think it takes a long time to get to the point where you can play it and see if it's any good, because you kind of have to have all the systems in place. We basically start off with the vehicle. So in Bomber Crew, it was a Lancaster bomber. In Space Crew, it's like a light cruiser. And so we just start designing the systems and just imagine all the scenarios that the systems could give you. And then we kind of work out from there. So once we've got the ship and all its oxygen generator and its shield systems and the reactor giving power to the gun turrets, then we kind of work out from there and create enemies that would challenge the player to have to manage their crew in different ways on board. So for instance, we've got an enemy fighter that flies in front of you and it kind of pops out these little limpet mines, which attach themselves to various parts of the ship, and then they give off radiation. So you can either get your security officer to engage the EMP, the electromagnetic pulse, and that will knock them out, or you just have to vacate that part of the ship for the duration until they fall off. Yeah, so we really kind of, for us, it's like inside out. It's the player systems first, and then we create the world around it to challenge the player.
Yeah, it's kind of a similar approach, and I completely agree with Dave. And also, it's a part of our game journey and something which is makes it slightly different from other games. So a lot of levels on our game are designed with sandbox approach in mind generally, and it's even more complex because it has another layer on top of it, because you can play it using only stealth or combat or combining both, which makes it even more difficult. In my mind, it's hard or even impossible to predict all actions or all things which a player can do. And as a designer, what it's is good idea to build is basically to provide the player predictable experience, so he knows exactly how every part of the system behaves, and based on that he can adopt his actions in a different environment and choose the right way to solve his goals. So it's about building a predictable environment where the things behave in the way the player expects, while in terms how they react on player actions. While the general, like the story or anything on top of it, it can change during the gameplay, actually.
That brings me nicely onto another question, which is all about difficulty. Like, tactical strategy games have a reputation for being, hard. So how do you go about making sure you scale the difficulty of your game to so that it fits and feels right?
So for us, sorry, go on, Sandy.
Yeah, I think for Peaky Blinders, it was just about being very aware of who our audience was from the very beginning of the project and having that in mind. So we knew that it was, this is a puzzling game, but we don't want just players to feel roadblocked or completely stumped by things. So we focused on making them head scratchers, but not just completely stopping players' progress, because then you don't feel like Tommy Shelby anymore. You feel, you feel like a dunce, and that's not something we wanted to do. So, we did add in a sort of a slightly harder Mastermind difficulty, which takes away some of the sort of hints for players. But from most people that we've seen playing it, and we got sort of mostly positive review scores on Steam, which for an IP-based game can be quite, a licensed game can be quite tricky to achieve. So we're really happy with that, and I think that shows that we've kind of managed to navigate that little treacherous alley quite well.
Yeah, so for us, because the core of Space Crew and previously Bomber Crew was we were trying to get the player to feel attached to their characters. These little characters they recruit who have unique names, who become their crew. You know, they're unique to them. We really want the player to be attached to them. So in order to do that, we have to make it likely that they'll die. Because if it was easy to keep them all alive, you wouldn't bother to learn their names or remember their heroic deeds. And so we do start off easy because there's quite a lot to learn in Space Crew. But it does get hard and it does get difficult because we just have to have the threat of losing a character to make them mean something. But we've got some stuff in there so that if you do lose everything later on, you don't fall too far. You know, your replacement ship and your replacement crew are of maybe slightly lesser level than you lost, but you shouldn't get stuck. You know, but it is challenging, and I think that's essential for this type of game.
So that difficulty question also plays into what platform your tactical strategy game is on, right? And obviously for Peaky Blinders, Mastermind, and Space Crew, both of those games are on consoles as well as PC. So what sort of things do you need to take into account when you're making a tactical strategy game for different platforms at the same time?
So yeah, I think strategy games on consoles are a bit of a challenge. Firstly, from the UI point of view, so you're not sat right next to the screen normally, you're sat back on the sofa. So you need to make sure the UI is clear from a distance. And also input, like using a controller can be a lot more fiddly than using a mouse. And so we spent quite a lot of time on controller support for Space Crew. One of the things we did to give controller players a slightly easier ride is when you're selecting a character, you hold a particular button. And while you're holding that button, we slow time down a bit so that while you're selecting, you don't end up panicking if it's in the middle of a firefight. So yeah, you do have to take care around console players.
For Peakies, we had a similar thing where we wanted players focusing on, you know, the problem solution and figuring it out, not necessarily sort of this kind of massive dexterity challenge once they've solved the challenge. You know, we want them to get onto the next challenge and the next head scratcher. So we spent a lot of time making sure the controls were streamlined. We have this, you know, this time machine basically that players can rewind and fast forward time, which is you know, you don't, it's not there's no standard controls for that in a lot of games. So, you know, moving characters left thumbstick, you're fine, but how do you control a time machine? So we decided to put that on the triggers. So that gives you sort of real fidelity over rewinding and fast forwarding. But also on bumpers, you can skip to previous events. So if you just want to sync up a couple of characters, then we give players a really quick and easy way of doing that. And that kind of lets them just go, right, okay, I've learned the controls for the time machine now. I can concentrate on the puzzles and the narrative and the characters and kind of get myself immersed in the world.
And obviously, Anton, your game Partisans in 1941 is PC only at that point. I mean, does that give you more freedom to necessarily do different things?
It has real-time strategy elements to it, especially during combat. PC is the most convenient platform to play it because it allows you to control multiple units at one time easily. But we also want to port our game onto consoles later on, which would be a challenging task because especially our game is not turn-based, and it would be quite challenging to adopt this type of formula onto the consoles. The one thing we have in our game is a tactical pause, which might be a good thing for consoles because then the player can lay out and plan their actions. And the other subject you mentioned earlier, the difficulty of the games This is something also which is specific for a game like Partisans, because it has like real-time strategy team, and real-time strategies are known for being one of the most kind of like difficult type of games, when you have not only to control a lot of units to make decisions and make them quickly, because everything goes in real time. So we have like different layers of difficulty, and our normal level, on the normal level, you can use the tactical pause, and you can use save and load game mechanics. This is where on this difficulty you basically you are getting used to the controls of the game and how it plays. But the ultimate the ultimate experience for our game would be on the hard level, because it doesn't have save and load mechanics, and it doesn't have a tactical pause. So it would be quite challenging. But with the game like ours, this is something a lot of players love about these games, when they have to be extremely precise and control all the stuff in real time. And also we have some other mechanics in our game which are rooted in meta games. So like during the mission you get armor, your characters can get injuries. So when playing on normal, you just can avoid this stuff by reloading your game. But then if you play on hard, you would have to face the consequences of what happened during the missions. You can't simply reload the game. You have to treat the members of your squad. You have to choose what you can do on the base, whether you have to actually heal your guys or do some additional stuff to get more armor. So I think the ultimate experience would be the hard level, but it will take time and effort, to control it precisely.
So Anton, another question for you, and it's something that's particular for Partisans 1941, which is obviously you're covering a period which is really, really politically charged. It's a period which is riddled with war. How much do you kind of walk the tightrope between historical accuracy and gameplay innovation and subverting players' expectations? Because obviously, when people think about this period, they have their own expectations that kind of come into it.
Yes, it's actually quite a challenging task to find a balance between the historical accuracy and the gameplay mechanics, because there are some things which are familiar and loved by players, but then you can't simply play them into a historically accurate or close to historical type of gameplay. So there are a lot of mechanics in like blink, teleport, having movable cover, or whatever, which actually work really well with this type of gameplay, but you can't really use them. So you have to adopt and find different ways. With regard to scenarios, obviously you have to do a certain historical research on the subject, and that's what we did as well. So it loosely follows the actual events which happened during this period of war. The other interesting thing is basically expectations of players. A lot of players, not a lot of, some players expect, and then if something is said to be based on historical events, to be that thing should be as accurate as possible and almost copy everything from real life. But the game is not like a simulator. So the game is something which meant to bring fun to a player when he's solving the goals of the game, rather than a constant and endless frustration if you do some stuff like in real life. For a good example on that would be the AI behavior in stealth games. So because there is a stealth part in our game, you can kill silently enemies, and then if you make mechanics when some members of the group notice immediately the absence of someone from the group and tries alert and search for the player, then it would lead only to either to reloading the game all the time, unless you do it perfectly, or frustration, or to frustration of waiting for a long time when the things calm down. So basically, you need to find a balance while they might react to finding a corpse or something like that, but then they aren't overcautious. Otherwise, that would be a frustrating experience. So this is our general approach to stuff.
Sandy, that's kind of the same for your game as well, right? Like in terms of the historical accuracy, and not necessarily historical accuracy, but people coming into the game with the preconceived notion of what they're going to play, about what sort of concepts they're going to play with, and what sort of characters they're going to meet. So what sort of things did you have to consider in order to successfully carry off the Peaky Blinders Mastermind kind of concept?
It was actually really interesting because you're dealing with an established world, an established universe that is proven. You know, people really like it. They are fascinated by it. They're fascinated by the characters, by the story, by the tone of it. So it's really nice from a developer perspective, because you can just focus on what story are you going to tell in that universe, and not have to worry about the fundamentals. Like, you know, it works. You know, the characters are compelling. You know that the tone jives with people. So our kind of crucial thing was to make sure that we stayed respectful. We also showed an interesting side of the characters. So the idea of the Shelby boys returning just after the war, where Arthur's still the kind of de facto leader, and this kind of charts Tommy's rise, like, because it's not a time for war anymore. This is a time for outthinking your opponent, and also showing people the small Heath that they haven't really seen in the show. It was really fun to sort of portray all that, and also making sure we get all the things that people would want to see in an interactive Peaky Blinders world. So, you know, getting Jeremiah in as a preacher, and, you know, showing the Peaky Blinders den so that players can wander around and talk to all the incidental characters. And, you know, we have Feverist, who did a lot of the music, doing the soundtrack for the game, which is incredible. Like making sure that you stay true to the tone and the subject matter is kind of the really, really key challenge. But you know, that Peaky Blinders has never been one to just sort of follow tradition. So I think that's why we're really excited by this idea of, like, overlapping characters' goals, overlapping characters' actions, and getting them to work together. Like, you know, they didn't really want to do a kind of cookie cutter game. They wanted to do something interesting that really kind of portrayed how the characters think. And so that was really fun from a game designer's perspective, because I've never played a game like this before in my life. It was really fun to work on something new and lots of interesting challenges to sort of tackle.
I imagine imposter syndrome is something that you guys have to deal with all the time as well when you're working on something that's that big.
I mean, you get that all the time, but all you have to do is you go with your best idea, and yeah, they were really good at giving feedback when things were, so they were really flexible with how things were used, and making sure that we could provide the best game experience as well. They kind of understood that was the key. So yeah, it all worked out pretty well, actually.
So obviously we've got Partisans 1941 and Peaky Blinders Mastermind that have players have preconceived notions of what they're going to get before they play. Whereas Dave, with your game, Space Crew, you've had to design a sci-fi universe from scratch. Like, what's that like? It must be quite a refreshing challenge and an interesting challenge and an enjoyable one to, like, have a blank piece of paper in front of you and just design this all from scratch.
Yeah, it is. So with Bomber Crew, we had World War II. So the scene was instantly set as soon as the game started. Anyone who played it knew what the scenario was, the two sides were. And with sci-fi, you just have to build everything. You know, if there's a spaceship, you have to design the spaceship. You have to design this scenario. So there's only 3 of us at Run a Duck, so we need to be smart with how we set the scene and sort of build the worlds. And so we decided to kind of borrow from movie tropes. So so there's lots of things in Space Crew that players will see, will kind of feel a bit familiar, and they'll recognize what it all means.
And plenty of Star Wars, Aliens, Starship Troopers, you name it, I'm sure. So guys, that brings us to the end of our time. Thank you so much for joining us on this. It's been really, really interesting. So I think the best thing to do is if you can just tell people, and maybe Anton, will start with you, just tell people where they can find you or where they can give you feedback on your game.
We can be followed on a Facebook page, and also for Russian speaking, we have a page on Contact, and you can find them with the keywords like Partisans 9041.
And Sandy, if you want to go next.
At FuturLab on Twitter, and we're pretty active on there. It's always good to hear feedback and to sort of hear people sharing their experiences of the game. So yeah, that'd be the best place.
And Dave, how about yourself?
So people can follow at Space Crew Game on Twitter, which I manage, so they'll be talking to me. Space Crew is out on October the 15th on PC, Switch, PS4, Xbox One, Mac, and Linux as well.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Anton, Sandy, Dave, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Hope you have a great rest of the day, and thank you everyone else for watching. See you soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.